brain transplants might be possible.
That's not a problem.
What is life like after the transplant?
You're just as healthy again, just as strong.
What do you think is the future of transplantology?
A scalpel is still needed.
Dear friends, today I am visiting a great person, someone who is probably associated, for everyone familiar with medicine, with such a field as transplantology. This is academician Professor Anzor Šalić-Kubutia, and he is the person responsible for the fact that, in my opinion, transplantology exists in our country at all today. And such a remarkable institution as the Sklifosovsky Academy, commonly known as Sklif, this great person led this institution for many years and continues to be at the helm now as the president of this huge institution. Anzor Šalić, thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
Anzor Šalić, when I entered your office, I saw a huge number of icons. And actually, my first question isn't about medicine. Tell me. I see a huge number of doctors who, over the years, having seen and experienced a lot, change their attitude toward God. Some become atheists, while others, on the contrary, become very religious people. How has your attitude toward God changed over the years?
You know, my relationship with God was established back in my childhood and teenage years. My mother and father were deeply religious people, and they always took me with them to church, and I observed all the church holidays. And when I went into medicine, my faith certainly grew stronger, especially when I started working independently and there was no one else to turn to. After graduating from the institute, my wife and I were sent to work in Central Asia, in Tajikistan. At that time, people didn't really know what Tajikistan was, and the medical care there was practically non-existent. As a pediatric surgeon, I had to do the work of everyone, and there was no one to turn to for help. But in my heart, I turned to God. And it happened that, yes, things worked out. Even when it was doubtful whether they would or not, they did work out.
Can you say that in your life you have encountered manifestations of so-called miracles in your work, when against all statistics?
Well, you know, I don't believe in miracles. That means a surgeon should be confident in himself. So relying on miracles, I think, is a bad habit. If a young surgeon appears somewhere, he should always rely on himself, never cry, and of course, God's help.
Anzor Šalić, many of our colleagues are watching you now and thinking, this man has achieved such heights, but we also seem to be trying. And what sets you apart? What qualities allow a surgeon-scientist to really achieve great heights? What does a person absolutely need to have in order to develop in this profession?
Do you mean transplantology as a profession or in general?
Medical.
A scientist of any profession. Probably you need to love the profession you have chosen for yourself, first of all, if you love it and have perseverance. In addition to that, you will easily achieve this progress, you will easily reach this position.
Anzor Šalić, actually, people have a very unusual perception about organ transplants. Many think that you can just transplant an organ and, let's say, not take care of your health. Then they'll transplant it for me and I'll start a new life. Tell me, what is life like after a transplant?
After a transplant? You're right, as you say, they do live a new life. First of all, people come for a transplant when they're in the terminal stage of a disease affecting a particular organ. If it's the terminal stage of heart disease, the patient can't sleep lying down, can't walk, they have shortness of breath, pulmonary edema, and develop swelling in the lungs. So the person is completely disabled, but after receiving a new heart, the motor starts working again, and the person can even start doing sports. I was a participant in either 1998 or 1999, I don't remember exactly. There were Olympic Games in Paris for people with heart transplants, and our first patients were there. I took 6 of them there and we brought back medals. They won prizes there. Our patients took both a silver and a bronze medal. Although the Americans had been doing heart transplants long before us and had well-prepared athletic patients, we didn't have that at the time. There was a patient, I remember his name was Gusev, and Shumakov performed a heart transplant on him. At that time, I was working with Valery Ivanovich, and Gusev had a size 39 foot. He was small and skinny, and there were no sneakers for him. He wanted to run in dress shoes, but at the stadium they said it was inappropriate. So I took off my sneakers, I wear size 42, and I was left barefoot while I gave him my sneakers. He ran in them, even though they were too big, and took first place. He had cataracts, so he couldn't see yet. During the 100-meter dash, he outran everyone and kept running further. When they told him to stop, he said, "I can keep running." That's how they live. But at the same time, they need to take the medications that have been prescribed to them, primarily suppressive drugs. Of course, they need to follow some kind of diet, especially patients who have had a liver or kidney transplant. As for those with a heart transplant, they usually don't follow the diet as strictly.
Anzar Shalish, as an oncologist, I often encounter, well, not often, but I have encountered in my profession, situations that occur after a transplant. Because they basically have to take medications for life that suppress the immune system so that the organs are not rejected.
Yes, there wasn't.
They have a higher chance of developing cancer. As we see, it happens more often with them. So these are still medications, not like vitamins. They are actually quite serious. And for people after a transplant, the risk of developing cancer increases.
Well, you're right. And this percentage is generally higher, maybe higher than without a transplant, without immunosuppression. But the question is about life itself. You know, without a transplant, the person would have died within a month or two. But with this, cancer may or may not develop, even if it does develop. Currently, oncologists already know and are selecting medications that extend people's lives. They live for 10 years, 15 years, and believe me, that's a lot, especially when a person was supposed to die in a month or two, but they're still alive. Many of our patients live 28 or even 30 years.
Azar Shalic, who are the donors for transplants in our country now, and who is considered the best donor for a person?
Well, of course, when it comes to donors, a paired organ from a living donor is certainly better. But on the other hand, this person suffers physical and moral harm when they give, for example, a kidney. Well, now we absolutely don't distinguish anymore, not at all. The level of transplantation and immunosuppression has increased, and tubular organs are being transplanted. 90% are tubular organs, especially in adults and children. Yes, for example, the liver. Parents most often donate a portion of the liver, the percentage is high, and the same goes for the kidney.
Anton Jalovic, how long is the current wait time, approximately? For example, for organs like the heart, liver, or kidney, those three organs.
You know, if we take Moscow and Europe, in Europe the average wait is 5 years, but Moscow is so advanced. The service, the donor service, and it really depends on the regional health department and the governor. In Moscow now, the waiting time has been reduced to 5 to 6 months. Within 5 to 6 months, donors are found and we perform organ transplants. Thank you.
Can I ask a question now about transplants and donors? I once reached out to a friend and arranged for someone to get a transplant, and they wanted him specifically to perform the surgery. I asked, when will the operation take place? He said something to me like, once the motorcycle season starts, there will probably be a transplant. Is it really true about the motorcycle season?
Not quite right, he said that. First of all, we never count on someone dying. We don't wish for that. It's better to be out of work and let people live. Well, it's the law of nature, but that was before, maybe 10 years ago or even more. But nowadays, modern technology, probably with cameras, smart cameras installed almost every block, especially in Moscow, has organized the traffic. And now motorcyclists get caught much less often than they used to when they used to race at crazy speeds.
And in general, what about motorcycle injuries? How do you feel about motorcycles? You know,
I'm very cautious about motorcycles. I've never ridden a motorcycle myself. And I don't recommend it to my colleagues either, because there's practically no protection there except for the helmet on your head. If an accident happens, it's usually a serious one.
The main misconception you encounter when patients come to you for surgery is what you hear from them, for example, regarding transplantation, the duration of the operation, or rehabilitation. What surprises them?
What concerns patients the most is how long the operation will last, but no surgeon can say exactly how long the operation will take. As a urologist, you know it may seem like a minor operation, but sometimes a vessel is damaged or complications arise, causing the procedure to take longer. That's why we also tell them that we can't give an exact answer, although this operation usually takes 3 hours sometimes, 3, 4, or even 5 hours.
Hansa Shelek, we all see in movies how they transport a heart. They really like to show that. Tell me, how is transportation done now? Are there some special containers, or is it really just like we often see? It's just a vessel containing the organ, and it's all surrounded by ice.
Well, surrounded by ice and a preservative, it's in a preservation solution. Well, now there are devices called in vitro machines that continue the blood circulation of the harvested organ. There's an oxygenator, and blood is passed through the oxygenator. They take donor blood and run the preservation solution through the oxygenator, enriching it with oxygen, and then supply it to the harvested organ. If before you could keep it for 5, 6 hours, now you can keep it for a whole day in this solution with this device. These devices are very expensive and the consumables are still very, very costly, but in Europe and America they are almost always used.
Azazar, can you share about our country's first heart transplant? Please continue.
But in our country, it was completely different. The world's first transplant was done by Bernard in 1967, then in 1968. Vishnevsky, Alexander Alexandrovich Vishnevsky, at the St. Petersburg Military Medical Academy, also performed a heart transplant, but the patient died on the table. Later in 1971, Gleb Mikhailovich Solovyov also attempted it. The patient, Matrosov, died as well. But the first successful transplant was performed in 1987.
On March 12, 1987, the operation was done and the patient moved to intensive care. We were all present. Who took part? In the first half of the day, on Saturday, there was already a call from the ministry. The deputy minister called and said, "We are calling on behalf of the minister, wanted to ask how things are going." I said, "Well, it seems the operation went well. The patient woke up, now we await the prognosis." It's a thankless job, but at that moment, everything seemed fine. He said the minister asked us to come and see the situation in person, so I talked to them. 3 people arrived and they dressed the deputy minister in special clothes and led him into the intensive care unit. He went in, found her awake, spoke to her, then returned and said, "I saw it, it's true." I talked to her, "Where is your phone here?" So he dials the phone. As I understood, it's the science department of the Central Committee. And he says, "I'm here at the Transplantation Institute. I saw the patient. She's talking. I spoke with her. Everyone is saying something." And then the deputy minister tells me, "Well, they asked me to tell you that. Congratulate Valery Ivanovich on a successful heart transplant." A thought crossed my mind. What? And if it hadn't been successful, it would have been hard to say what they would congratulate me for then.
And your own transplant, the first one, can you tell us about it? Who was it?
You know, I took part in Shumakov's transplant, in the first transplant, back in 2007. It was Shalkova, Shura Shalkova. She was from Siberia, a girl. She was brought to Moscow by plane. And she had extremely severe heart failure, dilated cardiomyopathy. That's what they call a huge heart that didn't completely fit in the chest. And so we had a house. And by that time, in 1967, there was already a Ministry of Health guideline on brain death. So it was already possible to take the heart after brain death. So we took the heart. He was a young guy. I remember it like it was yesterday. He had just returned from the army about half a year ago. His wife was in the maternity hospital. She had just given birth, and he was running across Volgogradsky Avenue with flowers to the maternity hospital. He was hit by a car, suffered a severe traumatic brain injury, brain death, and that's when they took his heart and transplanted it into Shura. Shalkova, thank you for the love and kindness you all showed me.
In 1987, Alexandra Shalkova left the clinic as a hero, celebrated with flowers, her new donor heart beating. By those standards, this event was comparable to the launch of a spacecraft. The operation was performed for the first time in the country by Valery Shumakov.
I hope these celebrations continue and become a regular tradition. Thank you.
She did very well. 11 years got married. Just imagine, if she had felt bad, would she have gotten married? She got married. And in the 11th year of her life, she stopped taking immunosuppressive drugs.
Yes.
She felt so good that she stopped taking immunosuppressive drugs on her own. I remember they brought her in. I was still working at the Institute of Transplantology. They brought her to us. I asked Shura, what could have happened? Why didn't you come earlier? She was already in extremely serious condition. And her husband brought a bag with cyclosporin tablets and put it down. He told me she was collecting these pills here and not taking them. So she could have lived for 11 more. She still could have lived for 11 more.
And when you were going into this surgery, which basically hadn't been done successfully before, what were you feeling? Weren't you scared?
Naturally, I was scared and anxious. Especially when I took a heart from a donor for the first time, you know, the heart was still beating. But when you start to prepare it, it stopped. And when you cut out the heart, there's just an empty space left in the donor's chest. For me, it was somehow, maybe as a Southerner, I'm more sentimental. For me, it was very serious. A psychological trauma, and then I started to show it. And then they take it away. When I've already outgrown that age, they give it to the youth, and I'm already healing again.
Anzar Shalic and these people who carry someone else's hearts, their relatives try to meet them afterwards.
You know, there was such a case described in the United States of America, but in Russia, I haven't seen anything like that. And in Germany, I haven't either. Nowhere in the press was there anything like that, but in America there was. When a mother gave consent for her 18-year-old son's heart to be taken, and then they became friends with the recipient, the mother would always come, put her ear to his chest, and listen to how her son's heart was beating.
Intestinal transplantation is an interesting transplant. Not many people know that it can be done. Overall, it's a complicated surgery.
You know, the surgery itself is not so much difficult, of course not so difficult for experienced surgeons, but it's very challenging in terms of rehabilitation and post-operative care. The intestine, mainly the small intestine, is what's transplanted. It's a lymphoid organ, and as you can imagine, the lymphocytes start working against the host, so you have to suppress them with much stronger immunosuppression than you would for a kidney, liver, heart, pancreas, or adrenal glands. You have to use much higher doses of immunosuppressants. In the world, there still isn't a unified registry for how to do this. I was just looking through the international literature again the other day, because 5 days ago I transplanted an intestine here in Russia. No one else here is doing intestine transplants except us. I was the first to start doing them. This was only the 8th transplant, but it's that complicated. Because if you give more immunosuppression, it affects other organs, the liver, the heart, the brain. You always have to deal with this problem and solve it to get through this critical period, especially the first 10 days. There's a patient lying here now. It's the 7th day after the transplant. Well, thank God.
Subtitles by Dimatorzok, God willing. Andrei Shalic, you have done so much for the profession, and the legacy you have left is truly astounding. I have a question. Among all your deeds and actions, what are you most proud of in your profession?
I am proud that I was able to create a school of transplantation in Moscow. I came from the Sklifosovsky Institute in 2006. Well, there were only a few here. There was Professor Zhao. There were 5 or 6 liver transplants done per year. Well, 5 or 6 a year. So what were people supposed to do next? Kidney transplants also weren't done here. There were also only a small number at the 7th hospital, and that's it. And so I managed to establish a Moscow School of Transplantology here, and today at Sklifosovsky, they transplant 6 organs. We were the first to transplant lungs here, the first to transplant a pancreas, the first to transplant an intestine, I already mentioned this, the first to transplant a heart. And I managed to create this, and I am proud of it. And today my students can perform these operations themselves, even without my help.
Anton Shalovich, and hypothetically, is it possible to transplant the brain?
So, Vladimir Petrovich Demikov transplanted a head, and the head lived, and he even has a photograph of it. I have a photo somewhere of Vladimir Petrovich when the transplanted head of his puppy bit him, and that head, the transplanted head, lived. But you can transplant a head to a human as well, that's not the problem. But until we learn how to restore the integrity of the spinal cord, what's the point of transplanting a head? There's no point, yes, there's no point in a head transplant because a person wouldn't have any movement in their arms, legs, or even be able to breathe on their own. It would be like Professor Dowell's head, but in that case he even covers the head. That's from a movie. If you transplant it to a person, they'd need a machine and artificial ventilation, not just for the lungs. Until we learn how to transplant either the entire spinal cord or restore the integrity of the spinal cord, this can't even be discussed.
Tell me, what is your opinion about online fundraising? We work in the public sector, and nearly everything in our country is now free, yet many people are still launching fundraisers. And when you start looking into it, it turns out that for some reason they don't want to have surgery here. It turns out, for example, instead of going to Moscow, they fly to Germany or Israel. And when you explain that it can be done for free, they don't mention it. And when people see these fundraisers, it seems to them that many types of treatment here are only available for a fee, because if they say they're raising money for treatment somewhere else, of course, no one will donate anything to them. Dispel the myth. The times when you had to fly somewhere for quality medical care are over.
You know, there was a time when Americans were doing heart transplants and we couldn't do it. And the Constitution of the Russian Federation says that it concerns citizens, Russian, Soviet citizens. Back then, the state would take responsibility, and if someone could get help somewhere, it had to be funded. But today, almost all surgeries are done in Russia, all of them, and the results are no worse than those in America, Germany, especially in Israel. In Israel, they only recently started doing transplants. So these fundraisers are also unclear to me. When a child has a heart defect and they collect money for Baccaria, miracles are performed at the Institute, at the Cardiovascular Surgery Institute. Now actually Golukova is the director and Baccaria is the president, but still money is being collected. I also don't understand it. Well, you remember the story when the Italian promised to transplant the head of our completely disabled guy onto another body. That was just an adventure.
Advertising?
Russian programmer Valery Spiridonov, who chose to undergo a head transplant, met surgeon Sergio Conovero in the United States. The Italian doctor plans to do the complex operation in 2017. The first stage of preparation is starting and I might get a body transplant. If it goes well, my life will change and I'll have freedom. To perform the operation of the century, the surgeon will need to refine his own technique and prepare about 100 specialists. In addition, the experiment requires almost $100 million. The patient and the doctor decided to ask various sponsors for funds to carry out the operation, including Bill Gates. Conovero likens the significance of his transplantation project to the Apollo 11 moon landing.
I was invited to appear on television on the first channel, but I felt uncomfortable about the second channel. There was some offensive word about our colleague Vitaly, but I understood that it was cheating. He raised a lot of money, and they did the same for ours here, and that was it. That's why I said that until we learn how to transplant and restore the integrity of the spinal cord, this can't even be discussed.
There is such a belief, and it's not just a belief. We often see that many deaths often happen early in the morning among our seriously ill patients.
We face mortality more at night. When the vagal effect occurs, most often it happens at night or early in the morning. When people with hypertension usually experience a spike in blood pressure in the morning, their blood pressure rises very high and a stroke can happen. This does occur.
You are in very good shape, and the proof of that is that you perform such big, complex surgeries, and you're not 20 years old, but you keep doing them successfully. And people want to get on your operating table, and when they have a choice and an opportunity, they try to come to you. And what's your secret besides genetics? How have you maintained your health and productivity?
You know, ever since my youth and childhood in the city of Sukhumi, where I was born, I was also involved in sports there. There was a club called Spartak, beyond the Red Bridge. It was a sports society called Spartak, and I trained there until I finished school. Then I continued for some time at the institute, and now I still keep it up. In the mornings, I do exercises. I walk a lot around the village, among the trees, and apparently that's what it is. You also need self-discipline. I wake up at 5 a.m. every day. I used to arrive at work earlier when I was a director at 15:06. Now I've cut myself half an hour and arrive at 15:07. I'm always at work, you see, and that also keeps me going. There's no time to relax. Then there's a lot of work, a lot of patients, a lot of surgeries.
Why? And how do you balance being a successful surgeon scientist and a family man? You have a family and children, right?
Yes, I have a family. I have 2 daughters, 6 grandchildren, granddaughters, and 4 great-grandchildren.
And how do you manage to balance all of that?
My wife is a doctor too. A lot of families among our surgeons break up because, especially for transplant surgeons don't have fixed working hours. When they're called in, that's when they're at work, and mostly we work at night. As you pointed out, brain death is usually recorded in the early morning or at night. And that's why the wife has to understand that he didn't go out to have fun, he went to work, and his job is very hard. And he should understand that when he comes home from work, maybe early in the morning and goes to bed, he needs at least a little bit of rest. When families understand each other, things work out and there's time to relax and have fun. Thank you.
Azov Shalek, in your life, what or who has influenced you the most?
You know, the first influence? The reason I became a doctor was because I had a relative, someone close to me, who was almost 40-something years old. At the Ryazan Medical University, the vice-rector was Professor Kubudia Bezina Ilarionovich, and he was an extremely intelligent person. He graduated from a music school along with the institute. He sang beautifully and played the piano. He was an excellent doctor, a very well-mannered and tactful person, and watching him as a child, I wanted to be just like him. Honestly, I'm not sure if I succeeded. And then, of course, I worked with my teacher for 31 years. There's a portrait of Valery Ivanovich Shumakov, and of course, I learned a lot from him. In particular, I became a transplantologist thanks to Valery Ivanovich.
Alexander Pavlovich, as oncologists, we often say that advances in modern technologies, especially cellular ones, could eliminate the need for surgery. Maybe one day we'll also reach the point where we stop treating cancer with a scalpel. Tell me, what do you think the future of transplantology is?
Well, you know, cellular technology can drastically change the way we cultivate donor cells and stem cells, our own stem cells from a particular organ, which is what the whole world is working on right now. It will be a major advance, but surgery will still be needed to implant the organ and ensure it takes. So yes, cellular technology will make it so that we won't need immunosuppressive therapy and we won't have to look for a donor.
And what stage is organ creation at right now, these cellular printers? Can you comment on that?
Well, you know, there are some reports that they've managed to grow a liver, transplant it into a mouse, or grow a heart. Well, there haven't been any further results reported anywhere in the world, but research is ongoing intensively all over the globe. The Japanese are working hard on this, and the Americans are involved as well.
Azar Shalik, do you have advice for the average person on what is essential to eliminate from their life? I mean, something fundamental. Many people use alcohol or tobacco, so what advice would you give?
Overindulging in things you love, even sports, is harmful and excessive. As for tobacco, I'm absolutely against it. I've never smoked in my life. There was a time with Valery Ivanovich as well. He never smoked when he was young either. Later, he started smoking cigars, and I did too. We sometimes smoked together. So for a while I smoked as well, but only cigars. It's less harmful, but I'm strongly against smoking and, of course, abusing alcohol. This should never be allowed.
Zasharich, what about electronic cigarettes? Young people like them now.
They're even worse. As it's already being written about now, they cause more harm because there's still a combustion process happening. Smoke still gets in. The combustion process is still there. That's alcohol, you see, it's all carcinogenic.
And modern food, well, it's just not very high quality. Well,
it's a global problem, you know. The world has become like they used to write. I remember that the world was designed for 5 billion people, and now it's 7.5 billion. Well, you have to come up with artificial meat. The Chinese are making artificial eggs. You have to feed 7.5 billion people. The earth can't handle it anymore, so what can we do? We'll adapt.
At Zorshalic, in the department I manage, most of the patients are overweight people, mostly those who lead an unhealthy lifestyle. But in your huge practice, do you see athletes more often? Because many people say that sports cripple, sports kill. And still, if we talk about sports, which type of sport would you say is the most harmful, the one that can wear out the heart or liver? For example, regarding bodybuilding, it often...
You know, I operated on a guy. He was 27 years old, a world champion with huge, scary muscles. And he had cirrhosis of the liver, but it was hypertrophic cirrhosis. His liver weighed, it's supposed to weigh 900 grams, but his weighed 8.5 kilograms. I could barely lift it when we removed it. We transplanted his liver. He was already dying. Athletes took him to Germany, but the Germans refused, then to Israel, and in Israel they also refused, saying it was already impossible. The athletes asked me, and I took him on. A surgeon relies on intuition, and I realized I could help him. And fortunately, there was a donor liver, there was a donor, and I transplanted it for him. It's probably been about 14 years now. He's back to working out. Well, he says he doesn't take steroids anymore, and he's just as big and strong as before. And he trains people and prepares them for this, for sports. The anabolic hormones they give them ruin the liver, they change the metabolism, the metabolic process, and they build up muscle. It's no coincidence. That's why I said before, as we discussed, that you can't do anything in excess. You can't do anything in excess, including sports. You can't push yourself too hard when people push themselves, and by the end, at the finish line, they can't even stand. They collapse, and that's an overload, a huge overload on the heart.
I have just 2 questions left, then we're done, Anzur Shalish. A lot of people nowadays don't follow a proper sleep schedule. What do you think? Does poor sleep, restless nights, going to bed late at different times, always wanting to go out, spending time on the internet, does all this wear out the body?
Well, of course, yes, a person should, at least now. I'll say that an adult should get at least 6 hours of sleep, but I myself sleep 4 or 5 hours at most, and I've been like that my whole life. The body definitely adapts. I told you I get up at 5 a.m., go to bed around midnight, and I'm up by 4:35. I've never needed an alarm clock. I always wake up on my own, even on Saturdays and Sundays. So, of course, it's important to stick to a sleep schedule. But in my profession, that was impossible. I always had to arrive at work earlier than everyone else.
Azar Shalic, I have a final question. What is happiness for you?
You know, happiness is family, happiness is a job you love, your own job, of course, and happiness is, of course, peace above your head when your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and really the whole world, you know, you can't just wish peace for one part of the world. Because the ancient Abkhazians used to say, I remember in Gudauta, during a toast, an old man, I think his last name was Oterba, said this. I was already working as a doctor in Moscow, and he said, well, I want to make a toast. For the well-being of your family, of course, but you can't wish well-being only for your family. You have to wish it for your neighbor too, because if your neighbor has a fire, it can always spread to you. So you should wish well-being for your neighbor as well. That's why there should be peace all over the world, because trouble can always spread. That's what happiness is.
Anzo Shalik, would you like to say something or give some advice to our viewers as a farewell?
To our dear viewers, so that they don't get sick, so that they lead a healthy lifestyle. This is very important. It's important to love your family and love your work.
Thank you, Anzo Shalic. I had a lung transplant on April 9 this year.
Then a kidney and pancreas on November 16, 2014.
Lungs on October 29, 2013.
August 14, liver transplant, lungs on April 1, 2014.
Liver on Jan 3, 2012.
Liver March 2nd, 2013. Liver on April 9, 2014.
Kidney in 2008.